Opening words. Please join us in a spirit of meditation and prayer as we deepen into our service and share our opening words for this morning. This house is for the ingathering of nature and human nature. It is the house of friendships, a haven in trouble, an open room for the encouragement of our struggle. It is a house of freedom, guarding the dignity and worth of every person. It offers a platform for the free voice for declaring, both in times of security and danger, the full and undivided conflict of opinion. It is a house of truth-seeking, where scientists can encourage devotion to their quest, where mystics can abide in a community of searchers. It is a house of art, adorning its celebrations of melodies and handiworks. It is a house of prophecy, outrunning times past and times present in visions of growth. That this house is a cradle for our dreams, the workshop of our common endeavor. Would Andrea please come up to light the chalice, which is a symbol of the spark of life in each of us. Our chalice lighting words for today come from an address in the Haudenosaunee tradition. Today we have gathered, and we see that the cycles of life continue. We have been given the duty to live in balance and harmony with each other and all living things. So now we bring our minds together as one, as we give greetings and thanks to each other as people. Our speaker today is Don Morrison, and he will be talking about living into our fifth UU principle. It says to introduce him in my own words, but I think in his words he would just say retired. Sort of. He's just been an important part of our community, and we're really happy to have you here today and have you helping out with the service. Thank you.
Well, good morning. I wanted to start by saying how appreciative I am to Janice Cheney and Karen Van Vossen and Claire Laustuder and Rania, and certainly folks on the program committee who I hear, since I've left that group, continue to have some really good discussions about all sorts of topics, and this is one, and the conscience and the role of democratic process in our has been a really good topic on the program committee. And a plug, if you would like to participate in that and help with the program committee, please see Claire Laustuder. I'm sure she would be happy to have some additional people participate in that. But I also wanted to just really say thank you to Janice. I had such a good time over at her house earlier this week. She had pretty much prepared my talk already for me. This is just wonderful. Thank you, Janice. You know, and as I was thinking of coming up here, I was thinking, well, you know, what I just described is the role of personal conscience and the democratic process in how we operate this congregation. It was a really good example of that. Well, in the fifth principle of the UUA, we affirm both personal conscience and collective democratic processes. UU Minister Parisa Parsa said the democratic process requires trust in the development of each individual conscience, a belief that such development is possible for each of us, as well as a commitment to cultivate our own conscience. Some would say conscience is our sense of right and wrong. One of the many things that draw people to Unitarian Universalism is that we do not have a dogma that we need to agree to. Instead, we consider relationships as important, and we have 7 principles to guide us. And I wanted to just take a quick minute here to read the 7 principles. The inherent worth and dignity of every person. Justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth. A free and responsible search for truth and meaning. The right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in the society at large. The goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. Respect for the interdependent web of all existence for which we are a part. One of the reasons I wanted to read those is that they're all entwined together. And then I looked at the fifth principle, the democratic process. Well, that's how we get there with all the other principles. How we live our values, what our participation in our community, locally and in the world, strives for. The democratic process, in the democratic process, the act of voting is where democracy is made real, and the connection between the tangible and the abstract is made visible. But, of course, the democratic process and freedom of conscience are about much more than voting. Parisa Parsa, who had a section in this book, The 7 Principles in Word and Worship, from the UUA, she said, she asked, will I act as if I am connected to something greater, and therefore as if my life and actions are significant? Or will I act as if I am completely separate and isolated from others, and therefore as if my life and actions are of little or no consequence? At this time, I want to take just a little bit of a trip through history, because democracy and the democratic process, what do we think about conscience and all this, has evolved over the centuries. The term democracy, which means rule by the people, came from the Greeks of ancient Athens around 430 BC. But they were not the first people, because in a few places in India have traditions of local democracy with earlier origins. The oldest functioning democracy is a more hotly contested question, and does include San Marino in the 4th century. Iceland, the Faroe Islands, and the Isle of Man all have local parliaments founded in the 9th and 10th centuries. The 6 nations of the Iroquois Confederacy developed their consensus-based government here in North America in the 1100s. In fact, the United States founders were influenced by the Iroquois. What's the point of all this? Well, the point is I like history. But actually, now that I'm retired, my history major, maybe I should look at some of that stuff again. Actually, the point is that human beings need and value being part of a community and participating in it based on their conscience, and that it is not a new idea. People in many parts of the world have developed versions of it for a long time. One of the important criteria that differentiate democracies is who has a voice. In Athens, only men with property, while in Iceland and the Iroquois Confederacy, both women and men. As we know, at the beginning of the United States, in the 18th century, voting was limited to men with property, and we have gradually expanded that over time. Who has a voice continues to be a very real issue. We have seen efforts across our country to limit people from participating in democracy. Some of us in this congregation volunteered in October to overcome some of the unnecessary restrictions aimed Native Americans in North Dakota. In our congregation, we care deeply about making sure those who haven't been listened to have a voice. Sarah Ruth Van Gilder, who is the founder and executive director of Yes magazine, said of participation in the political process. As our circle of compassion has expanded, so have our capacities to keep ego from dominating the world, to build movements based on distributed power, to listen deeply to the fears and the hopes of those we are trying to reach, and to choose language that communicates our common humanity and aspirations. In groups such as congregations, the internal process has also changed over time. Think of the Christian church 1,000 years ago and our UUA as very different ways of who has authority and who has a voice. In the Unitarian Universalist Association, congregations are autonomous and can make their own decisions, but are part of a greater whole. In groups and congregations, we choose to come together, and in the Unitarian Universalist, the individual is important, as is community and building a level of trust within that community. We look at this as an opportunity, as well as a responsibility of having conversations with each other civilly and responsibly. This can lead each of us to gaining a deeper understanding of ourselves, our community, and how we live out our principles. As a group, we make decisions and evolve. Sometimes those decisions aren't right there, concrete, more or less, but as we experience life. In our UU congregation, we participate in developing some common understandings by how we relate to each other, listening to each other, working together on keeping this wonderful place functioning well, working for equity and compassion in human relations, searching for truth in meaning, and much more. The conviction that we share is to live by our conscience. People want to join us because we live by this. Groups do carry a conscience that is discernible and noticeable to those who enter into the group. So bringing our personal conscience makes us all better. It's who we are together. And with those little longer remarks than I thought, I would like to open it up for responses to some of the questions. If people have anything that they would like to respond to, or your thoughts on what it means to you, what the fifth principle means to you. I will just quickly look at the questions. How has your conscience brought you to this UU community? In what ways has your conscience moved you to participate in the community? How has your understanding of democracy changed over time? Where does conscience come from? How is conscience the same as a system of belief? How do we honor, this may be a key question here, how do we honor both the person and the collective? Any?
Hi. Well, years ago, the UU did a series it was a 10-part series about the origination of the UU, and it was a videotape and a workbook, and I really appreciated it. And one of the UU ministers in there said, God gave us a brain to think and to question, and I think that's what's been most important about coming here, is that no one says what you think is right or wrong, but we're all on this journey of questioning. And I think when we can question, and those questions can be validated to elected officials that are making decisions for all of us, is a part of the democracy. And that's what I've appreciated about this community.
Thank you, Margie. I'm reminded that my mother, who was a energetic United Church of Christ woman, with 6 children said many times, God gave you a brain, now use it. A little more, but it's the same, it's that idea, yeah.
Well, now I want to say something about that, but I'm just always curious where we conceptualize that conscience comes from, particularly in this community where we have so many different senses of sort of the origin, the origin of humanity or the existence of God or something else or not. So I'm just really curious how we even understand what conscience is. But what I originally wanted to say is, in terms of a voice, I'm getting more and more curious about different places that are making an effort to give a voice to places that have been often voiceless in a very human decision-making process. So Mother Earth has rights now in Bolivia, and I believe there's a river in India that also has rights. And how complicated that is to consider, and what a responsibility to try to carry forth a sense of what those voices would say if we could hear them.
In my mind, particularly conscience is something that I don't think we think about a lot. I think we take it for granted, and so it's really kind of nice to bring it to the forefront for a little bit of attention and thought. And I think largely in this country, the element of democracy has been taken for granted, and people don't think about, until perhaps something, comes to be very much effective, to very much affect them. We just assume, well, we're a democracy, we have a state legislature, we have a Congress, and, they do their stuff and we do ours. And I have long thought that we need to put a fair amount more of attention in schools about civic life and the process of how our government works. I mean, perhaps, I think my daughter Bobby had some of that in her advanced, American civics or whatever that she took. But I don't remember really getting any of that in school. And it's a foundation. It's a very foundational piece of our lives in this country, and we need to kind of take it back.
Yeah, I don't come here too often. I do come when you guys talk about your principles, and anytime I can hear Don speak up there, I'm appreciative of that. But I think I come here to somewhat try to connect with humanity in some way, to kind of be part of something, which I don't always have, and I'm not always good at that. And then the other thing, with things that have been going on in our current world events right now, I read somewhere, and I'm going to paraphrase this, it has something to do with the sad part of democracy is knowing that when it's given to a people, they will eventually vote to take it away from themselves. And sometimes I'm kind of seeing that, and it's, it kind of gets to me in some ways. But I'm just trying to hang on to what little bit of humanity I can with other people, and then it's not so bad.
My name is the Lorax, and I speak for the trees. No, I actually just wanted to talk. Would it stem from integrity, conscience? I was just looking, where does conscience come from? So, speaking where our beliefs are in alignment with our actions and our thoughts are in alignment with our beliefs. So conscience could be almost like a bell saying, something's not in alignment with you right now. Something maybe external is reflected and showing you that there's some disharmony inside, or vice versa. But that was kind of my My question is, would it come from integrity? And then if we're honoring individuals, are we honoring their integrity as well and the differences that we have in those?
If we're looking at democracy, then what is the alternative? Oftentimes, it's, to understand something, you look at what is the opposite of it. And authoritarianism, I think, is the opposite of democracy. And I've become curious lately about this whole thing about who are, as a country, who are our enemies. If democracy is our great claim to fame or our greatest commitment, then why is China, why are they making Russia and China into our enemies? And it's the authoritarianism of them, and which is very different than having communism as our enemy. I always grew up. I'm so old that I remember when it was democracy versus communism. Well, now it's democracy versus authoritarianism, and I think that's very interesting to me to understand, and to figure out how should we relate to China and Russia if that is their primary philosophical plank.
I think one of the things that when we're troubled about the democracy as it is today is that people have given up following what their conscience is actually telling them to do.
Yeah.
That we have let whatever discipline or party or leadership tell us what to think, and then being fearful of speaking up if we don't agree with that from our own conscience. And in this congregation, I think everybody's brave and speaks up, but other places don't do that.
Right. All right, thank you.
Our time together ends. In the days before we come together again, may our actions match our words, may our thoughts be filled with love, and may we truly make a difference in a troubled world.